right. Professor, do I have your permission to record?
You do.
Okay. I want to thank everybody for coming back, listening in to another conversation with another thought leader on the topic of potential divorce. Today we're talking with Professor William Fossey. He is a Paul Burden Endowed Professor of Education at the University of Louisiana Lafayette. Recently, he wrote an article in Condemned to Debt called Let's Kick California Off the Island. Professor, do I have that correct?
Yes, my name is William Richard Fossey. I go by Richard, but that is correct. Yes.
Okay. And you do have a law background, I believe, in Alaska, but you also clerked in Texas, and you were educated at Harvard and now teach in Louisiana.
Yes.
Okay. Uh, uh, is there anything else? We always like to ask people to introduce themselves. Is there any other stuff you'd like to tell people about who you are, your background, etc.?
Yeah. I received my law degree from the University of Texas and practiced law in Alaska for 9 years. Went back to Harvard and got a doctorate, uh, and then I've been teaching in higher education ever since. And in fact, I just retired last month, so I'm a professor emeritus now.
Okay. Now, could you tell us, Professor, about the essay you wrote? And I understand it was tongue in cheek, but you said something in there that I found very interesting. Could you tell our listeners what you wrote and what you were saying and what was very fascinating?
Well, I have just toyed with the idea that this country might break up into to portions that were more that would break up because of the cultural values of the coastal elites are so different from the cultural values of the Midwest, the Rocky Mountain West, and the South. I'm just shocked from time to time to realize, how different those values are. Just to give you an example, California has passed a law that prohibits state-funded travel to states that are not sufficiently progressive on various issues.
Right.
One of those states is Texas, and that just astonishes me. Um, and it just strikes me that California, at least the elites of California, have molded a culture that's just totally different from most of the rest of the country. And so I just speculated about the possibility that a constitutional amendment would be passed that would allow California just to leave the United States. And although I wrote it tongue in cheek, I think if it happened, this is the way I think it should happen. I think that California, if it became its own country, would have to leave the military bases and ports available to the United States, and there should be some way that Americans and Californians could do business together and travel without serious restrictions. But it seems to me that the flyover country where I live has become so different in political values, social values, religious values from the coastal elites, California, and then I would say Boston and New York City as well. We've really become sort of two countries.
So you don't feel this is, and I'm asking, the to challenge, but to accept your perspective as a professor and somebody who's, I guess, obviously been following politics for decades, has a background in law from multiple states, has traveled in many American states. This isn't the same old left right arguing with each other that goes back decades. This is different and more divisive and dangerous than anything you've seen in the last, let's say, 30 years. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think we're drifting further apart, with each passing month. However, this has been coming for a long time. Now, I practiced law in Alaska for 9 years, and it's a very distinctive culture, and went directly from there to Harvard. That was 30 years ago. And even then, I was shocked by the way people were thinking up there, and I was also shocked by how provincial the Cambridge Boston community is. Those people think they're the most sophisticated people in the country, but in fact they're not. I think if you ask people with say graduate students at Harvard or various so-called intellectuals to name the capitals of the states or to locate some of the Midwestern states on a map, I don't think they could do it. And so really they're not that worldly and sophisticated. They're very provincial. And another thing I noticed is, and this offends people when I say it, but I found the Cambridge community and the Boston community to be racist. And I don't mean that they were racist in the classic sense that we think of the pre-civil rights South, but the racial segregation of people is quite severe up there. And that struck me as I left Harvard to go to my first higher education job. I drove south from Cambridge to Baton Rouge, and I stopped in the evening to have dinner at a restaurant in Georgia. And I thought to myself, there's something odd about this, something different. And then I realized what I was seeing was black people and white people having dinner together. And there were, a significant number of African Americans eating in a restaurant with white patrons. And since I've lived in the South or the Southwest ever since, I'm impressed over and over again, really how much more racially integrated we are in the South than we are in Boston and Cambridge. We have African Americans. We have an African American mayor where I live. African American members, I believe, are the majority on the school board. We have African Americans in state government and universities. And my city, Baton Rouge, is majority African American. So we interact, blacks and whites, 30, 40, 50 times a day. That's not the way it is in Boston and Cambridge, and I don't believe it's the way it is in California. So we hear the elitists talk about diversity and inclusion and all of that, but in fact, I don't think it's genuine. I don't think it's genuine at all, and I think the racial posturing at the elite universities is not bringing us together. It's making us more and more conscious of race, more and more develop a sense of victimhood and unfairness and racism in popular culture, which I don't think exists. I think most of the American people are tolerant. I don't believe they're racist. I don't believe we have racism as part of our state and local politics, and yet that message comes out from both coasts and from the elite universities on both coasts, and I just think it's wrong.
Well, let me ask you, building off what you're saying, We here in the left coasts are told that all of the minorities, maybe they do sit at a lunch counter with you in the South, but they don't think like you. They're not conservatives. Secretly, they're all liberals. Secretly, all the minorities throughout the South want California to push California values on them. Is that true?
No, I don't think it is.
Okay. I always question
I
that because I have family from the
no,
South, and that's not what I saw.
no, there are always racial tensions and cultural tensions, wherever you go, all across the earth. But the South, in my view, has been transformed, was transformed during the Civil Rights era. I think the changes are enormous. Uh, and I'm sure you can find open racists in the South, but by and large, I think the racists live together and work together fairly harmoniously. And I'll tell you on that point something else. I lived in Houston for 6 years. I taught at the University of Houston, and I was just amazed at how multicultural Houston is. We think of Los Angeles as being multicultural. We think of New York City as being multicultural and diverse. But I'm telling you, Houston is as diverse culturally and racially as any place in the United States. And people get along fine. Houston is a terrific city. The cost of living is fairly low. People can buy homes. People can find jobs, and the city is just a bazaar. So like melting pot's not a good word anymore, but it's just amazingly multicultural. There's a large Vietnamese community there, Korean community, Chinese, Indian, Pakistanis, Hispanics. A very large percentage of Houston are Hispanics. And I think it's fair to say that by and large, people get along great. Anglo-Houstonians appreciate Hispanic Houstonians. I think I guess I find it particularly offensive to hear the media talk about racism against Hispanics. I just don't think that is true. You can find some people that feel that way, but by and large, that is not true. And in fact, I don't think most people care too much whether their Hispanic neighbors are here legally or illegally. People are working. Our Mexican immigrants, Mexican Americans, are famous for their work ethic. By and large, they're devout Catholics. I read a report a while back that Hispanic immigrants had a higher percentage in the workforce than Native Americans. I mean, they're hardworking people.
Thank you. That does my heart well. My family's actually Latino from Texas, and I can back up what you're saying. Amarillo. It's a little town called Dumas near Amarillo. I'm sorry, Amarilla is the way it's pronounced. Don't want to get in trouble there with my relatives. And I've seen that. One of the things that got me was that I'm here in California, and I love it here, and we are progressive. But you have people talk about the Midwest and the South, and they have this opinion of all the minorities are liberal, everybody's going to turn blue, and it's just Caucasian people who really don't think like progressives on the coast. All the minorities obviously must be left-leaning. And I have relatives in Texas who are Mexican, and that ain't true. They are conservative. they are still conservative and they have no intention of turning left. Thoughts, feelings, Professor?
No, I think you're exactly right. I think the media's portrayal of Latinos is way off. Um, do they? I think they're sympathetic with people who are trying to get into this country to find jobs. I think most people are sympathetic, but they are not people seeking a handout. They're not. Um, they're not going to vote for Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. I don't believe.
That's what they're saying
Yeah,
out here. That's what I wanted to ask you. Was I didn't think that's true,
yeah,
but the newspapers say that's true.
yeah. I don't think it's true. I think the political views of now I spent a lot of time in Texas, and I love Texas dearly. And I think that Anglo Texans and Latino Texans, Hispanic Texans, are very similar in their basic values. And one thing that we don't acknowledge enough, I think, is that a lot of Latinos are devout Catholics,
Right.
and they're in the church. I remember in Dallas that the cathedral in Dallas was renamed as Our Lady of Guadalupe Cathedral, and it's the most popular Catholic church in the Dallas area. They have 6 masses, at least they did when I lived in the Dallas area. 6 Sunday masses. 5 of them are in Spanish, and the church is full for many of the masses. I went to my wife and I went to the mass on the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. We could not get inside the church, and I think those values, those conservative, traditional values about family and work, are very strong, and the growing Latino presence in Texas and the South is overwhelmingly positive. Now, here in Louisiana, we did not have much of a Latino population until after Katrina. And when the Katrina hurricane in 2005 brought in a lot of Latino workers with good construction skills, and they have been here ever since. And we see a larger Hispanic presence in Baton Rouge and in the schools now. That is nothing but positive. And when I talk about that with my neighbors here in Baton Rouge, everybody says it's great. And we see young Hispanic guys up on the roofs building new homes. They're in all sorts of crafts and construction. Nothing but positive. And I think it's offensive to me that I keep saying the coastal elite is sort of a shorthand term for so-called progressives and elitist thinkers. They don't realize how positive all this has been and how accepting everybody is of it. There's not. I tell you, there is not racial or cultural tensions between Hispanics and Anglos in the South or the Southwest. It's just not there. I don't believe.
Well, let's now that we've established that demographics are changing in the flyover, the South, the Midwest, but that's not necessarily changing the politics, as the newspapers here in California say. That's not true. I want to pivot to what got us started on this conversation. And that I know it's a tongue-in-cheek essay, but you have a law background and you are a professor, and you had suggested that maybe conservative America would be okay with passing a constitutional amendment to allow California to leave. Recently, I had the privilege of interviewing Professor Buckley, I believe out of the George Mason School of Law. He's a professor at School of Law in the East Coast, and he wrote a book on secession coming out this week, and also had an article in a conservative magazine about that. And he, too, suggested that maybe conservatives would be okay with passing a constitutional amendment. He didn't go as far as saying full-blown secession, although there is a lot of support in California for that. Um, he
Uh-huh.
was he was saying, but it's a similar idea, Professor. It's a similar idea. Is that California wants to do its own thing. It doesn't listen. Yeah, I'm on the phone. It doesn't listen, and so um, what if just to get past this and make America work better, you gave California the ability to do immigration and trade and environmental laws and some reduced taxes so they're not a donor state. And in return for this constitutional amendment, California agrees to not participate in the Electoral College. It basically gives up its right to participate in that. Still keeps Senate members, still keeps House members, but it cuts down on a little bit of the chaos with the presidential elections, gives the rest of the flyover states a better chance to be listened to, and cuts down on some of the chaos in Congress because it California is no longer going to be fighting with the federal government over some of the major issues that it seems to now. What do you think about that, Professor? And do you think that's something that conservatives may be willing to do in America?
I don't think that's politically feasible. You know, basically, what you're talking about, it's an intriguing idea. Is kind of what China does. China has autonomous provinces uh, where the population is dominated by uh, cultural and ethnic minorities, different cultures. But of course, they're still under the thumb of the communist Chinese, and I don't think the 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 left coast would support it. Um, I think what's more palatable to everyone would be either you're in or you're out.
Okay.
Having said that, though, I've just been reading Leon Uris's book Trinity about Ireland, and there was some stuff I I didn't know. It's very interesting. Of course, Ulster and Ireland split. The Ulster Protestants were just almost maniacally opposed to leaving Great Britain, and they didn't want to be governed by a Catholic majority, and they split, and that was probably the best thing. But it seems to me that maybe what's suggested there is sort of like what England tried with home rule for the Irish. It didn't quite solve the problem. And I just don't think California will give up participating in the Electoral College. I just don't think they'll do it. Uh,
Sure.
I say you're in or you're out.
So, as a professor who's traveled to a lot of places, lived in a lot of part of America, talks to other conservatives. Let's say California was saying, "Okay, America, if you pass an amendment that lets us go, we'll go," and then no more confusion. Do you think that's something that politicians in the South and the people in the South and the Midwest would support? Hey, we're still friends. We'll still trade with each other. Maybe we would even have a military alliance like a NATO here, but going to be a separate country. In return, America, you don't have to deal with crazy Maxine Waters anymore. Is that something you think conservative America, the people, and the political class would support?
I think they would be very cautious and tentative at first, but I think if that idea gains some momentum, I think they would. I'm just sort of composing a science fiction novel in my mind about all of this, but it seemed to me that if something like that happened, the place for it to start would be the upper Midwest, the Plains states. I could see, I don't know much about local politics in North Dakota and South Dakota, but, I could see one of the states not a southern state, but a Midwestern state or a Rocky Mountain state saying, what the hell, just for fun, let's get the ball moving. And so that it wouldn't start with a focus on um, with a focus on race, actually.
Right.
Yeah. And I say North Dakota did it in a few states, and then I think you'd see the South would be positive about it. The people keep talking about Texas as being a purple state. I don't think it is a purple state. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
The state of Texas passed a campus carry law that allows students and professors to carry handguns on campus. Well, that is not what the universities in Texas want at all. I graduated from the University of Texas Law School. Nobody wants that, and I think it's a crazy idea myself. I don't think it's a good idea. But the fact that the state of Texas passed that, it's really over the solid opposition of the universities, is an indication that there's a pretty strong conservative bias in the Texas legislature. And so, yeah, you might run that by those West Texas, East Texas legislators, and they'd say, hey, wait, what a great idea. Let's go with it.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate that. I started this conversation by talking to professors and activists about this concept of what we started our conversation with. It's getting really divided. It's getting very divisive. People don't seem to be able to have basic conversations. I think I was talking with Professor Buckley, and he was pointing out government shutdowns seem to be very popular these days. They have happened before, but it was rare. And now it's every other year. And you can clearly see it ain't working. So what options are there? When you keep two people who are married to each other in an abusive relationship, things go bad. Sometimes letting people separate as friends and have a divorce allows them to stay friendly and raise kids in a productive manner together versus staying together. I know that was the case with my parents. I was very upset when they got divorced, but after a few years, they were better people to each other than in that horrible marriage. And I got to say, as a child, that was a better experience. Yes, I'd prefer they stay married, but versus people yelling and screaming at each other. So I wanted to be able to talk to professors and activists and try to explore this idea, because I think it's time for Americans to start thinking about, what if it gets really, really bad? We're just going to have everybody ramp this up to the inevitable conclusion, or are we going to start looking at alternatives so that we can reduce the stress and tension? Thoughts, feelings, Professor?
I think it's a very, very intriguing idea, and I agree with you that the relationships might be friendlier. And something else that might happen, if California were to become its own country, it would have to deal with its huge budget issues. They have a huge shortfall in their pensions, which are entirely too generous. And if they had to deal with all that stuff on their own, maybe they would back off some of this crazy stuff and realize, we've got to do something about homelessness. We've got to do something about the cost of living and all those sorts of things. The California politicians might suddenly become a lot more conservative if they had to manage the mess they've made out there totally on their own.
So good for California and good for America in California. We're not arguing in Congress about issues that were decided decades ago. Congress maybe passes legislation. We've had a Congress throughout the Obama years and into the Trump years that is the least productive Congress in American history, going back maybe 80 to 100 years, meaning they just don't pass legislation. They can't get anybody to agree on anything except for major things like military funding or stuff like that, anti-Russia legislation, which is great, but Congress needs to pass laws and come to agreements, and they can't seem to do that. So I feel we need to be looking at options to keep that system running, and maybe a separate California and America might be better for both, I think is what you're saying. It would force both to function better.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to think about. It's a serious thing to think about, and I'll throw something else in the pot here. You know, so much of our political culture, our media culture, our intellectual life has been shaped by the elite universities on both coasts, but particularly in the elite schools in New England and in New York. What's developed is an attitude of disdain for American culture. The people, our media people, our university people, just despise American culture. I'd say, go do your own thing. And I would like, if California win, I'd say, why don't you throw in Eastern Massachusetts as well? Get Boston and Cambridge out of the mix. I think, having spent some time at Harvard, I just think that intellectual culture is just a cesspool. I think part of our problems is that a lot of those people go into politics. All our Supreme Court justices graduated from either Yale or Harvard Law School. Adam Schiff has created so much havoc as a graduate of Harvard Law School. I'd say California, have a nice life, and by the way, take Boston and Cambridge with you.
Okay. Well, we're winding down, and I get that was tongue-in-cheek, sort of, and I hear you. Professor, winding down, where can people get a hold of you? What's a good way to contact you? And what are some publications you've written recently that you'd like people to look at?
I have an active blog site. I publish 700 blog essays, mostly on the student loan crisis. So that's where you see brief pieces. I'm also on the editorial advisory board for Teachers College Record, which is one of the oldest education journals in the country. I've got about 80 essays, many of them co-authored there. So if you Googled me, you could immediately click on Teachers College Record, and there'd be a list of those 80 essays. But my blog site's very active, and I don't often venture away from student loans, but I did on that essay about California. And I'm going to start it. My wife tells me I need to start another blog site that deals with these cultural issues and keep that separate from the student loan crisis.
You do, because I'm sorry. I didn't. Sorry.
No,
do whatever you want, but I got to tell you, I am going around interviewing professors and people about political division, and the impression I get is no one else is doing that. No one's going around going, it's getting pretty bad. Have ideas about how we get out of this? Reporters are just reporting that it's getting bad. Nobody's having the conversation about, okay, and then what? Because Civil War was bad. Let's not do that. And I don't see reporters focusing on this as an issue, making sure to talk to thought leaders, making sure that we are elevating a conversation across these 50 states, maybe 49 in the near future, maybe 2022, that makes it peaceful in the future. I just see people going, wow, it's getting bad. What happens next? So if people who don't like violence and have a brain are willing to jump in this conversation, I think America needs it, because there are not enough people talking about peaceful solutions to calm things down, from what I've seen. So yes, we desperately need you to jump in the game, Professor.
Yeah, and I could talk about this for a long time, but it's the one thing that I think we're losing in the current state of affairs are some traditional values that basically served us pretty well. and I'm a convert to Catholicism, and that really introduced me to a structured intellectual way of looking at the world, looking at values and family life and all of that. And our coastal elites, the intellectuals in the media are tearing all that down. And I think the people who want to form, to create a new culture, I think they should have I wish them well. California could be a great laboratory, but it disturbs me that we're losing values that we might need. It's a dangerous world out there.
Okay. Professor, and anybody who will see this, Professor, if you know anybody else who is concerned about the division in America and talking about options just in case so it doesn't explode, I definitely want to interview them. And to anybody listening to this, please contact me, Marcus Ruiz Evans. That's Marcus.Ruiz.Evans at gmail.com, or go to Marcus Ruiz Evans, Critical Thought Leaders on Political Division at YouTube. And Professor, please send anyone my way, and please consider jumping in the game. We need more rational people who are interested in peace, but are willing to recognize that America, as we've known it, isn't functioning that well anymore, and some sort of big shift change is going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. And Marcus, I know we're winding up here, but there is a name. I wish I thought of him sooner. A guy you should talk with and a guy you should read is James Howard Kunstler.
Okay. I've heard that name.
He's sort of an independent intellectual. He has a blog site. He publishes twice a week. Very provocative. You would find his stuff very interesting. The blog site has kind of an unfortunate name, in my opinion. It's called Clusterfuck Nation.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Clusterfuck Nation. And it's very interesting. He's a really bright guy. He interviewed me for a podcast a couple of years ago. And he also has a number of books. The most influential one, in my opinion, is The Long Emergency, which I think came out in about 2005.
The oil crisis, right? This is the oil crisis guy? Okay, yes. Yeah,
he's an oil crisis guy, and he has some views about what life would be like in a post-petroleum world. But recently, his blog site has ventured into politics and culture. He's very articulate, and I think you might not agree with everything he says, but I think you'd find him extremely provocative. And I would love to hear what he would say if you asked him about California succeeding.
I will. And Professor, if you run into anybody else, I will email you back a copy of this interview. If you run into anybody else who's interested in this, please send them my way. And I'm definitely going to be looking up Cluster Blank Nation, the blog.
Yeah.
And
okay.
I'll talk to you soon, Professor. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much for calling. I enjoyed chatting with you.
I'll send you something soon, an email soon, Professor.